we have a national housing strategy. So actually dating myself even further, before the Canadian Alliance conferences, in 2005, there was the first national conference on homelessness at York University. And at that time, a declaration was put forward by Kathy Crow and Stephen Gates and Tim Aubrey. And they wanted a national housing strategy. And they said it's a shame to Canada that every other country of the OECD has one and we don't, which actually wasn't true, but things were harder to Google back in 2005. But they made the point, right, that we needed a national housing strategy. And so we've got one. Well, we still have homelessness, right? So I think there's work to be done on this national housing strategy, and so it's that we have strategy, but maybe not all of the strategy that we need. So we take some starting points here, right? So we take a point that housing is a human right. That's going to be important as we think about sort of how does that become systematized, right? So what is eviction in the context of housing as a human right? What is discharge from hospital in the context of housing as a human right? And also we took position, homelessness serving system cannot solve homelessness independently. Right, and very specifically, and I'm glad to see Councillor McAllister from London, welcome. Great to have some politicians in the room. Explicitly, it's not that we aren't doing things well, right? Because in London, I would say, like, we've always tried to push to sort of the front of evidence-based practices and that sort of thing. But even once we roll out our whole of community response, that's our current iteration, if there's other factors in play, we will see improvement, but I don't think we'll see the end of homelessness. And so really thinking about prevention as well. So you'll see that come through. So. And then my other sort of okay, I'm starting to sound like I have a lot of frustrations. I'm a happy person, but another frustration that I have is with our plans, our current plans. And so part of this project, we're reviewing community plans, not just from across Ontario or Canada, we're looking at community plans from around the world. And one of the questions I'm asking of those plans is, if we implemented this plan to end homelessness in Peru, would it end homelessness in Peru? And you look through the plan, you're like, okay, we would do all this, and actually, no, we wouldn't. And I think it's probably true of all of our community plans, right? If we fully actualize this community plan in your community, would you end homelessness? Unfortunately, probably not, right? And so current planning is constrained, right? It's constrained by 4-year government cycles. It's constrained by pragmatic budgets and all of those sorts of things. So almost all of our plans are like plans to reduce homelessness is really what we're looking at. And so I said, well, as academics, we have a luxury. We have a luxury to dream, think, talk about tough things, make fun of governments, but not my local council. And so I said, okay, let's do it. Let's say, what would it actually take to prevent and end homelessness? What would a framework to actually, not all this pretend stuff we've been doing, what would it actually take to end homelessness? And so that's been the adventure of this project. So the piece that I'm sharing with you is just like our first iteration of part of the findings. It doesn't include any of the international analysis, comparisons, critical policy analysis, that sort of thing. It's a first snap, and I'll tell you what it does cover. This work is thanks to the Ontario Alliance to End Homelessness, which is one of the CAEH networks, which is a great gathering. So I was the chair of the London Homeless Coalition for 6 years. It felt very lonely at times, and so having an alliance of coalitions or alliances is amazing. If your province doesn't have an alliance of alliances or alliance of coalitions, I invite you to do that. Of course, Shirk for giving us the cash, and Western for not piling too many things on my plate. Okay, so what did we do? We talked to 70 experts, again, folks with lived experience, policymakers or people who deliver the policy, service providers, academics, activists, and advocates. And we asked them all these questions about what's working, what's not, where's the hope in the system, where's the failures, what would you need, what would success look like, how would you end homelessness? And we went through this and we sort of categorized all the different areas. And then we also then did a second analysis where we looked at what are sort of the key policy messages, policy transitions, changes, that sort of thing. And we did have a nice diversity of folks. Sorry about the font size on that. But folks, some who had been in the sector for quite a while, many who were relatively new as well, and representing academia, management, administration, policymaking, et cetera, and some diversity as well. Okay, so we talked to all these brilliant, experienced, pained people, and what they told us was there's a complicated system. And it's an interesting thing, right? Because I, depending on my audience, I'll be like, homelessness is simple. Or I'll be like, homelessness is complicated. So you're the homelessness is complicated crowd, right? And of course it is simple, it's housing, right? But we're gonna look at all of the pieces, right, that create homelessness, and then where are those like potential policy levers, right? What can we change in here? And so again, apologies for font, and I don't expect you to see this. One is these are posted, so you'll be able to zoom in and browse it later, and I will zoom in as myself. But in the overall picture, right, is that there are macro, meso, and micro factors. Everything from government policies and how governments work together or don't work together, down to intersecting systems, down to how we actually deliver service at the ground level. And all of those things are potential for change, and all of those things both create homelessness and have the hope of ending homelessness. So I'm just gonna do like a quick point through, because this is the sort of the descriptive part. It's the more analytic part that I think is probably most interesting to you. So at the macro level on your left, you'll see governments, so different orders of government. So I mean, sorry, it's an Ontario-centric picture on that. But you know, who's funding? Where's the funding coming from? Is the funding sufficient that's coming from the different orders of government? How's it flowing through? Hypothetically, is the federal government giving the provincial government a whole bunch of money that doesn't flow through? It just uses to pay down its deficit. Hypothetically. At the next level, it's like, what are the foundations, right? And so anti-Indigenous racism, the need for decolonization, the need for gendered lens on our work. And then on the right are all the different aspects that make the housing system, right? So everything in the housing system we know influences rates of homelessness, causes of homelessness, as we've seen in a very sort of glaring and dismaying way currently. So at the meso level, you have the actual sort of homeless serving system, the different pieces of that, from transitional housing to supports in housing, how people get into the system, such as through coordinated access, which can be done well and which can be done very harmfully, the planning of the system, and then all the different other things like justice, like child welfare, that are sort of feeding people into homelessness right now. And then at that sort of ground level is basically the tools that folks have who are delivering services. The practices that they're implementing, the different sort of approaches they have to help people out with income. I was just in a rent bank, one which I will talk about in a second again, but all sorts of tools to like try to help people in crisis, try to prevent, try to get people out of homelessness. So it's a complex system. There's lots of levers here. However, as we looked at sort of the analytic part about where are the potential shifts, there is going to be a simpler picture at the end of this. Here are the things that folks told us are going to be fundamental improvements. The first one is income support. So we have to address poverty. And we have to do this in a real way, not a patchwork way. And we'll talk about the problem with patchwork ways. But even a comprehensive poverty reduction approach alone won't end homelessness. And I will explain that. But we do need to address poverty. We need to get realistic about not a guaranteed income, I would say, because not a basic income, because I don't think we need to give money to people who have money, but a guaranteed minimum income, I think we need to talk about, right? So getting everyone above the poverty line. And if you're working for your money should not be poverty wages, right? So that is a fundamental, foundational shift we need to make. However, if we gave everyone tomorrow a guaranteed minimum income, we would still have homelessness, right? And rents, rents would go, whoa, right up through the roof, right? And we'd have no more housing. We would just have everyone having a lot more money and paying it on the housing that we have, right? So it is a important step, but that if you just turn that policy lever, you don't end homelessness. We need a managed housing system. So the system itself has to constrain cost and constrain rent. And so that includes several factors. That could include rent control. I will happily have a beer with you over why everything that's been written about rent control as like a failure is actually problematic. We won't get there without rent control. And having done rent control poorly in the past, not working, is not good defense of why we shouldn't have rent control. It's a defense of why you shouldn't do rent control badly. And then social housing. And so it was interesting that you'll notice the minister said non-market housing, which is great because like they know what they need, and we'll help their hands and we'll get them to say it. Let's say it all together. Social housing. No, and so we need. If you want housing that is truly affordable, right, and that is going to stay affordable and not like run out after 20-year agreements or 30-year agreements, or only be affordable to like a portion, etc. We're going to need to control rents. We're going to need to have social housing. However, if we had a lot of social housing and we had a guaranteed minimum income, people will struggle to stay in their housing, right? So what do we need? That's not the button. We need supports to keep people in their housing, right? And so one of the ones I like to think about is eviction. And to me, I think that we can figure out eviction. And I think we can do eviction in the context of housing as a human right in two ways. The first is that we are a much more intelligent, responsive system to help people when they are in crisis. And then secondly, we think of housing transition rather than eviction, perhaps, right? So if folks aren't working out in their current housing, and landlords do have their own rights as well around who's in their housing, then maybe that person needs to be supported to move into a different type of housing, right? And not evicted, but transitioned somewhere else with the right supports, the right systems, or the right cost. Permanent supportive housing, which plug, my PhD student is presenting on tomorrow morning. Our research on permanent supportive housing is sort of the way to go. One of the things we've really noticed, and so scattered site, like off-site supports that go to where people are, amazing. You guys do great work. That's really hard work. Having the supports in the building where people live is, at the end of the day, a more optimal model. Pre-housing loss support as well. All right, so those are three essential shifts and an overall conceptualization that is going to help such a system work is that homelessness should be rare and short. So homelessness should be rare in that it should be prevented as often as possible. However, we will not eliminate all crises, right? So Finland, who has almost eliminated homelessness, still has a crisis landing system. They have public housing. They still have crisis spaces, right, for people to land, right? And so if you're leaving violence or something like that, sometimes you do end up unhoused. But those crisis spaces cannot have any barriers. If we're going to be a comprehensive homelessness list system, we need to let everyone in, right? Everyone needs to be able to come into the crisis door to get the help, if the help is going to be there, right? And this can include like the concept of housing first, right? As philosophy is rapid, rare, and short. And then no discharge from other systems. And that can be done as well. Wales, the Housing Wales Act, which is not related to the animals you would see here, it's the country. The Housing Wales Act says people cannot be discharged from child welfare into homelessness. It puts the responsibility on the council to house everyone exiting child welfare. So we can do that. We can put these things into law. We can make these policies. All right, so to check the boxes, we need to have a tough conversation about social housing. I highlight this one because this came up again and again and again in our interviews, is like, we've been working now for 1983 to 40 years. We've been working around that like giving up on public housing thing, right? And like, oh, like we can figure this out with this thing or that thing, this affordable housing, housing first, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, 40 years of chasing other things. We need to have the conversation to go back to, why is Finland doing better than us? Why is Austria doing better than us? Why is the Netherlands doing better than us? Why are the countries like the UK and US, who not only stopped doing public housing like we did, but also sold their public housing, doing a lot worse than us? Have to have this conversation. And New Zealand, because public housing has that deep affordability built in, it's rent controlled, it's permanent. And this time when we do public housing, let's put supports in the building, okay? That's one important thing.
So finally, where does this leave us? Well, this leaves us to consider what it would look like to have a whole system approach that is truly going to prevent and end homelessness. And this is our design of what we would consider an ideal system. So the first place we have to start is we have to start at a serious, comprehensive approach to poverty more generally. And we've situated this directly in government. And the reason why we're considering a systems approach is because working around the margins of structures that don't support people's income, don't support people's housing, means we're always working downstream. And so we've identified something like a guaranteed minimum income as a starting point that's going to address poverty. And that income has to be delivered at a level that allows for dignified living, reflects true cost of living. From there, so starting at that point, which we know is a big shift, but needs to be done, from there we can then consider sort of the different components of the housing system itself. And here is where we do see the necessity of having sort of a variety of different housing opportunities, from stuff that is simply more affordable to affordable with supports. And also ways to support the private market to be somewhat constrained, and that's things like a comprehensive rent control approach, and things like building high density infill, that sort of thing. And so then from here, any crises around people's housing should be supported. And so we recognize that there will still be evictions in an ideal future because the landlord and other tenants have their rights as well. But all evictions should be a move from one form of housing to another form of housing. In the same way, all exits from public systems should be moved into housing. And again, to the right housing, so whether that's just affordable or whether it's affordable and supported. And we see in this model, we are actualizing housing first, and we are actualizing housing as a human right. In terms of what the homelessness serving system would look like, it would exist to make sure that homelessness is prevented as much as possible. So that would be things like legal services and supports. That would be things like housing supports that come to people where they are in their current housing in crisis. So not waiting for people to be dehoused, but connecting with them while they are still housed to try to problem solve and correct things. That would include things like tools such as rent supplements to support if there is an income issue, or there's a utilities issue, or there's a damages issue, or something like that. We'd have tools to detect risk, early on and prevent housing loss before it occurs. And we would still need crises spaces because, for example, someone may leave a partner who is violent and they still need to be able to do that and do that quickly and have some place to go. And those crisis spaces should be respectful. They should have no barriers to entering those spaces. Otherwise, we're screening certain people out of protection and we will still have some homelessness. And they should be quickly assisted into new forms of housing. So overall, we do believe that a future in Canada that is prevents homelessness and ends all homelessness is possible. However, we really do need to have that grounded in a policy approach. So we're not going to get there just by nonprofits alone doing the work. We're going to need comprehensive approach to poverty more generally and a comprehensive approach to the housing system, as well as sufficient supports and services for crises prevention and addressing crises as they occur.